Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. This is Carmen Yetzi Mazzara, Executive Director of APSIA, the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. We're so glad to have you here as part of our ongoing series of workshops for the Public and International Service Advisor Network. We're delighted to be joined today by Nakia Landau from the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship. She's going to walk us through all of the great opportunities that the fellowship provides, and then we'll have some chances to answer your questions as well. The session is being recorded and will live afterwards on the APSIA YouTube channel, along with all of our other presentations that we've been able to do. If you have questions as we go through, please feel free to throw them in that chat bar and we'll take them as we go. If you have any technical issues, feel free to direct message me. And with that, I'm very pleased to turn the floor over to Nakia to get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. I have just a quick audio note, which is that every time somebody asks to join the meeting, it's doing a little doorbell noise. So you'll hear that. Sorry about that. I just tried to switch it off, but I could not figure it out. So if you know, let me know. But I'm really delighted to be here, and I'm going to be presenting all about the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowships for New Americans, which is a graduate school fellowship. So this is an opportunity to let undergraduate students know about. We're so happy to be with APSIA today. Thank you so much for having us, and to Carmen for organizing. And we really do love having policy-minded students coming our way. That said, I'm going to focus on that today. We are open to students of all backgrounds in terms of their academic preferences and pursuits. So if you do run into other types of students, this is certainly a fellowship to tell them about, but we'll focus on sort of MPP, MPA, all that sort of range of student today. This is just what we'll go over. And if we're a small group, so if you'd like to ask any questions, I'm happy to answer them as I go, whatever is comfortable for you. Here's the general overview of our fellowship, though. We're a graduate school fellowship. We're one of the most generous programs in the country. We provide up to $90,000 in stipend and tuition support over 1 to 2 years. And students can apply when they're applying to graduate school. So let's say they're applying to graduate school this fall to go start in the fall of 2022, then that student could apply to our program this fall, or they could wait until next fall, or they could apply both years. Our fall conference, we have a fall conference and campus visit, which are essential parts of our program, really the cornerstone of the program. And we have 715 fellows in our network. We've been around for 23 years, and we've been giving 30 fellowships a year. We have, as I said, we have fellows from all different types of academic focuses. So several fellows, or many fellows, are in medicine and law and engineering. And in addition, we have many fellows in policy. Okay, welcome to everybody who's just joining. I'm just going through the basics here, so feel free to jump in with any questions. And if you could introduce yourself in the chat, that would be great. I'd love to know what school you're coming from, and if you have any questions coming into this or a focus area. Just to describe the fellowship, I think the most important thing is our history. Since we are a fellowship for new Americans, immigrants, and children of immigrants, I wanted to share what our background is, which is we are a fellowship that was founded by Paul and Daisy Soros, who are immigrants who came from Hungary. Paul Soros is no longer with us. Daisy is the chair of our board and very active along with her sons. And Paul, they shaped the fellowship around Paul's story. Paul grew up in Hungary and lived under communism and Nazism. He was taken as a prisoner of war twice, and he actually only got out of Hungary because he was able to join the 1948 Hungarian ski team. And he was able to get a visa and defect the next day instead of going with the ski team to Switzerland. And then he came to the United States and got a full ride to Sarah Lawrence on a ski scholarship. And then was a very poor graduate student looking to apply for schools, applied everywhere, and could only go where he could afford, which turned out to be great. Brooklyn Polytechnic, which is now part of NYU. But he always kind of remembered that feeling of being capable of going to the best institutions, but not able to. And he ended up starting a great engineering company, and that propelled him into a great career, building different ports around the world. And of course, he invested with his younger brother, George Soros, who many are more familiar with, and did very well in life. So Daisy and Paul wanted to create a fellowship that supported immigrants and children of immigrants and really celebrated their accomplishments. Okay, so the fellowship, what we do every year, we look for the 30 most promising new Americans against immigrants or children of immigrants who are going to go on to make distinctive contributions to American society, culture, or their academic fields. And they really serve as an example of the richness that refugees and immigrants bring to this country. One of the fellowships said this quote on the screen: the fellowship liberated me from the traditional path I was expected to follow, unburdened from debt and energized by peers who are taking the road less traveled. I have been able to thrive. So we really hope that the fellowship is an opportunity for new Americans to take big risks and challenge sort of take on the challenges that they're most excited about from a really early age, and not have to worry about paying off student loans or doing what their advisors think best, although they should probably listen to their advisors. But just taking big risks and going for it. So I just want to talk about a few fellows who have backgrounds in policy. These are past fellows. This is a 2001 fellow who's from Nicaragua and sought asylum in New Orleans. She went to Loyola University, received her MPA at UT Austin, and now works in North Carolina. This is Kevin Nazmi, who's a 2005 fellow who was born in Tehran, went to MIT and was the class president and commencement speaker, worked in business, and then did an MBA, MPA, which is certainly also a possibility. Many fellows do dual degrees with us. And he is a co-founder of Oscar and Renew.com. This is Ankur Shaw, who's a 2005 fellow who also did his MPA at Harvard's Kennedy School. He has a background in architecture from college. He's also worked in the private and nonprofit sectors. And then he went on to become the chief development and finance officer at Careem, which is an e-hailing company in the Middle East that was bought by Uber last year. Is focused on groceries oh, sorry, it looks like my internet connection went out there. Sorry about that. Can you all hear me? Good, sorry. So he works for We, which is a grocery company in the US. This is Catherine. She's a 2015 fellow and the child of immigrants from Mexico and Honduras, went to UC Berkeley. She's a Mitchell Scholar and has nonprofit experience before going to receive her MA from the Tufts Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. And she now works for Libraries Without Borders. This is Elliot G, who's a 2021 fellow and an immigrant from China. And he went to Emory and got really interested in US-China relations and did several internships while in college, went on to be a Schwartzman Scholar and is now studying politics at Princeton with our fellowship. Thanks to everybody who's joining. Feel free to just let me know what university you're coming from in the in the chat, and we're just going through some of the recent alumni from our program, and I'll continue to just go over the basics. Not a policy candidate, but this is Nadine Burke-Harris, who is one of our 1999 fellows. She's the Surgeon General of California. Vivek Murthy, who is Surgeon General under President Obama and now is Surgeon General again. Just two examples of fellows who are in the network. This is Feifei Li, who is one of the sort of great technologists of our time. She is an early fellow. So these are just, we have plenty of fellows who are in policy, but we also have fellows who are in medicine and law and business and engineering and all these entrepreneurship. Connect with all of them. We really do try to keep a close network, and we see our alums regularly and incorporate them into the fellowship. So it's one of the great benefits of being in this sort of interdisciplinary group that has all different subjects in one fellowship. Again, this is Meyer, President and CEO at Public Advocates, somebody who's focused on civil rights. So the fellowship, what is it? It supports 2 years of graduate study in any field at any advanced degree granting program in the US. We don't support programs that are abroad. They have to be in the US. And it can a student can do a 1-year master's or a 2 years master's. But if they're doing the 1-year master's, that means they have to apply and receive it the year before they're applying to graduate school. If somebody's doing a 2-year program, then they could apply in the fall before they're, when they're applying to grad school, or the first fall of their program. This is the breakdown in funding. So somebody could receive up to $90,000 in funding, and we really try to get every fellow that much money. In some cases, some students are in PhD programs or receiving NIH grants that prevent them from receiving the full funding, but that is in limited scenarios, especially for students in policy where the tuition is high and there's not that much financial aid that they'll often see the full amount. What is required? So the Soroses really saw this as being a gift to the fellows, but we do ask the fellows to participate in 2 fall conferences, their first and second year, usually in New York City, but we're trying to move it this year. We'll see if that happens with COVID. And these are really just wonderful celebrations. They're a requirement, but I would just love to do this. If I was part of any fellowship, we'd take them out and to different dinners and go explore the city and just give them a chance to really get to know one another so that they can build those lifelong bonds. What we're looking for, this is on our website. It's not, it's not a secret, but this is when we review applications, this is what we're looking for: demonstrated creativity, originality, sustained accomplishment, promise of future significant contributions, planned graduate training that's relevant to future goals, and a commitment to the Constitution and Bill of Rights. So just to go through that a little bit in more detail, demonstrated creativity, originality, or initiative. That might look like somebody like the fellow I mentioned earlier who's studying architecture, making a pivot and deciding that they would like to study international development and somehow bringing architecture and international development together. Somebody who is taking leadership roles, somebody who is taking on student activities and thinking about new projects that they might do. Or it could be somebody who is the first in their family to graduate from college and they really needed to learn a lot just to make that happen, or even the first in their family to graduate from high school. So we see that in all different ways popping up. We look for it in the letters of recommendations, in the resume, or in the essays. We also want to see sustained accomplishment. Again, that might be that there's somebody who's the first in their family to graduate from high school or college. There's somebody who's taught their little sibling English or been responsible for their parents' translation. It might be somebody who has really sought leadership from an early age, or in college has really been just right from the get-go working hard and trying to figure out how they can make a difference. And the promise of future significant contributions, we just say past is prologue. So if somebody's really active in college or in high school, or in the years following college, those are good signals to us that they'll continue to be making contributions. So if somebody's applying and they really haven't taken on many leadership roles, or they haven't really excelled beyond what would typically be expected, then that's somebody that's probably going to need a little bit more experience. But again, we think of merit very broadly. So even if somebody may not have traditional internships, but they were the first in their family to graduate from high school, that to us is a huge sustained accomplishment or signaling of that, and a huge promise of future significant contribution. Planned graduate training is relevant to future career goals. So this is pretty straightforward for a lot of people. I always say, like, if somebody says their dream is to be a dentist, then we would expect them to be going to a school of dentistry. So if that's the case, like, they don't really need to spend much time on their application talking about that or explaining that. But let's say somebody wants to go into policy. Well, there's all sorts of ways that you can go into policy these days. You might go to business school, you might go to law school, you might focus on, you might want to focus on an international development degree, or you might want to focus on nonprofit work. We really want to know how you chose the programs that you're applying to and why those are the best programs for getting you to your goal, since there are so many different ways to achieve. And we really want to know that all of the degrees you're seeking are helpful. So if somebody wants to do an MBA and an MPP and a law degree, we kind of want to pull back and say, are all of those necessary to achieve your goals? And hear why. So I think sometimes students can take this a little bit for granted and think, of course, going to this school is the most obvious choice for me. But in some cases, it might not be. And so they really should be thinking critically, and you as their advisor might be able to help them think, like, okay, well, what are other paths you could take? Now let's defend this path. And it doesn't have to be the whole essay or the whole application, but it's just something to think about. And of course, many students do apply to many different types of programs. So they can list all those different programs on their application and then explain in their essays why they're kind of applying to. They can say, like, my first choice is XYZ program, but I'm also applying to all of these other programs for, these reasons. We do want to know if somebody is going to graduate school, let's say at they live in Jackson, and that's where they have to live, then we want to know that that's contributing to the decision that's like on why they're only applying to schools in that one geographic area. So, that those types of contextual pieces are also really helpful to include. And then finally, a commitment to the Constitution and Bill of Rights. This is pretty self-explanatory for anybody who you're probably working with, because they're clearly they're committed to policy and the gifts that policy can give to our society. They see policy as a solution. They see law as a solution. These are things that are closely aligned with our Constitution and Bill of Rights. We often see this as a challenge for students in medicine or science who their activities don't really have anything to do with the Constitution or Bill of Rights. To those students, we say, being able to freely contribute scientific research or to be able to, or medical research, those are things that are actually linked to our Constitution and Bill of Rights. And you can talk about that. For any student, talking about what their life is like in the US versus what it might be like in another country, why they immigrated to the US or why they had to come to the US, those get at these questions, and you don't need to explicitly, a student doesn't need to explicitly talk about the Constitution or Bill of Rights, but we would like to see sort of themes about the fact that they are here in the US, it's different from other countries. Why is that important to them? Or how has that played a role in their story? We are not looking for 5-star Yelp reviews about the American experience. I can talk more about that for our essays, but we are interested in people who are interested in the project of America. For eligibility, I can kind of go through this as quickly or slowly as you need. It's pretty complicated, but for eligibility, you can be born abroad or born in the US. If you were born abroad, one of these things needs to be true. You need to have been naturalized, be a green card holder, be adopted, have refugee or asylum status, or if none of the above, have graduated from both high school and college in the US, which would be inclusive of DACA. But 2 years ago, we made it even more inclusive. So even if somebody didn't have DACA but was eligible for DACA, they would be able to apply. If somebody was born in the US, then they just must have been born abroad if somebody was born in the US, then both of their parents must have been born abroad as non-US citizens. We don't actually care what the parents are doing now. They could have moved back to the other country. They could have never moved at all. So we say the child of immigrants, but what we really mean is somebody who was born in the US and their parents were born abroad. We're not trying to keep track of what the parents did or hold the child accountable for what the parents have gone on to do. And if the parents are undocumented, totally fine, great. We're not interested in it. We're not judging the student on that information. Okay, for academic standing, as I mentioned, so let's just say that somebody is applying this year. The application deadline is October 28th, and it usually is around that same time every year. And if somebody is applying this year, then it means they must be planning to be enrolled next year. So the fall of 2022 is when they should be planning to be in graduate school. They don't need to know where they're going to graduate school to apply, but somebody can also apply in their first or second year of the program. So somebody could, let's say somebody is applying this fall, that means they could be in the first or second year of their program, but they have to be planning to be enrolled next year. We can't retroactively fund their first year if they're not going to be in school the next year. Okay, and then this is just a breakdown of what I kind of just said. So you could be a college senior, a college graduate applying. So it could be several years out of college. You could be applying, you could be in a joint program, and you could be, several years into one and then applying for another. And then we don't support online programs. I know that a lot of programs are executive programs or part-time, and we do not support those just because Daisy and Paul really wanted to support full-time programs. And that's why they wanted the fellowship to be so generous, just so students could really kind of focus in on that. We know even with a grand stipend, it's still out of range for some people, but that is our goal. For eligibility, students must be 30 or younger as of our deadline, so they can't have reached their 31st birthday. And then just some basics on our selection process. We are merit-based, so we see people who have all sorts of different socioeconomic backgrounds, also different levels of opportunity and privilege. And our general philosophy is just we are looking at every student and seeing what opportunities and obstacles they had, and then judging them against those. So if somebody didn't have the opportunity to have internships in college, that's totally fine. We're looking at them for what opportunities and obstacles they did face. And if somebody did have the opportunities to have, internships in high school, then we will be looking to see how much they achieved with all those opportunities. We don't have any quotas. So sometimes people think, oh, the fellowship took somebody that has my exact field last year, so that means they're not going to take someone this year from my field. But it's actually kind of the opposite. That often is a good indicator that we think your field's really exciting and has a lot of potential. And same for universities. It doesn't matter if somebody was from your university the year before. All applications are reviewed after the deadline, so it's not a running process. You don't have to apply early. There's no benefit to that. And we do a holistic review process. So every time an application is reviewed, we're reviewing the whole application. It's not like, oh, look at the resume, look at the GPA, look at the test score. We look at all of that holistically with everything else that's being submitted. These are the different things that are involved in the application. We only need the test scores that are required by a graduate program. So if a graduate program doesn't require them and somebody didn't take them, we don't need them. But again, we don't have cutoffs, so students shouldn't feel afraid of this part for us. And the things I'll go over are the essays, the optional exhibits, and the recommendations. So the essays, the first essay is about the student's new American experience, where we basically ask them to tell us about their story. And we're really looking for their story. It should be something personal, something that is only about them. And we want to know, what does it mean to be a new American to them? If they grew up in the US and were born here, they can certainly talk about their parents' immigrant stories and journeys, or even their grandparents. They can talk about, if they immigrated here, they can talk about what life was like and why they wanted to immigrate or why they had to. There's all sorts of different ways to approach this essay. I always tell students to head to our Instagram page to hear what our fellows are. We hand our Instagram over to different fellows every week. So it's a great way to hear what fellows are talking about their own stories. And you can go through all the past fellows, and if you're in a certain field, you can find somebody in that field. The second essay is more of a traditional graduate school application essay. It's why are you applying to graduate school? What are you applying to graduate school in? And kind of what are your biggest aspirations? And we are looking for people to tell us their goals, their sort of short-term and long-term goals, but we're really not holding anyone to that. So I do encourage students to think big. And I think that students who are able to really think like in the dreamiest ways are better served by that. So, and I know it can be challenging if students have imposter syndrome to say like, I want to be Surgeon General or something like that. But, if you are, I'll use the example of a doctor. If you would like to serve patients as a doctor, that's really noble and wonderful, but we want to know, how are you going to have outsized impact in your life, and what about you is uniquely going to shape that. And of course, students in policy are really have a great opportunity here, because they will be hopefully shaping policy, and policy can help and lift up so many people. So, talking about that and talking about why they've chosen this field is really an exciting thing that we want to hear about, or how they've done that in the past as well throughout the application. Excuse me. The optional exhibits, we're interested in this. You can leave the exhibits, a student can leave them blank, or they can have several exhibits. Usually this is where a music composer might include a score or a recording of their work. An actor might include a YouTube link. If you're in policy, perhaps there's an article that's written about you or your work, or a nonprofit you've been involved in. Maybe you have a presentation you'd like to include from a class. Maybe There are photographs that are relevant to a project that you referenced earlier in the application, or maybe you have a talent that didn't come up at all in the application, but you'd like to share a little bit more about. But again, these are totally optional, and they're optional for our reviewers to review as well. So if you include a 100-page thesis, our reviewers do not need to read that in full. They can say like, okay, great, they wrote a thesis on this topic, cool. So, and same if you provide a YouTube link, the reviewers don't need to click on that. But for anything that somebody's submitting, if they can include just a 1-sentence or 2-sentence overview of why they're including it and what they want the reviewer to see, especially if it's a link. So this is a link to my personal website. This is a great this is an opportunity to share for you to see my portfolio, or this is a website for a company that I worked for, and this is a product that I worked on or referenced earlier, something like that. Then finally, the recommendations, that you can have 3 to 5 recommendations, and we see successful applications with 3, 4, or 5 recommendations. There's no perfect number here. The trick is really to have great knock 'em dead recommendations. So all of the recommendations should really be ones that that are sort of, know the candidate well and can really speak to their talent. Recommendations can come from anyone. So while we don't encourage students necessarily to use their family members, like it's all fair game. So we've had teachers who've used students that they've taught in the past. Certainly professors are somebody that many students will use, advisors. If somebody is applying for a PhD program, we having somebody who can really speak to their research abilities is great. But if somebody has been out of school for many years, maybe they won't have any professors on their in their recommendations. So it just depends on the student and what they're applying for. That will shape what we're looking for. Other resources, we have online guides under our apply page for students. We have a mailing list students can join, and social media pages that we encourage students to follow. And these are kind of the next steps for any student who would be applying this fall. So that's it for me, and I'd love to take questions. You can certainly raise your hand, or I don't know how best to do this.
Well, Nika, thank you so much. And while my colleagues are typing their questions, my microphone unmutes, so I get the privilege of the first question. You talked about no online programs, and I'm curious how that requirement has shifted in a COVID world where some schools had to be online, and if there were any other pandemic impacts that have changed the process.
Yeah, that's a great question. We are, if a program is online as a result of COVID temporarily, then that's fine with us. Or if a student is doing that as a result of COVID, that's totally okay. But if a program is fully online and it was always online, then that wouldn't be eligible, even though there's COVID. And then let's see, other impacts, I think just generally, as I said, we have a holistic review process. So we know COVID has impacted people in all sorts of ways, and certainly academically, that may be one of the ways that people have been hit, or just they haven't been able to take on an internship or do the things that they were hoping to. So, candidates should certainly share that information. I think that COVID has also been a time when we've seen a lot of leadership from young people. Not that everybody has had the opportunity to do something to give back or to lead in their community, but if students have done something about the COVID situation, then that's certainly something to share as well, even if it's at a family level or an individual level, how they have managed that. But again, We know students have also suffered a lot. And so if they feel comfortable sharing that, that's fine. We always kind of leave space for applicants to share any type of setbacks that they've had for us. That they've had, if they want to include that in the essay or as an optional exhibit, like, I had a really tough second semester sophomore year because my mom was going through XYZ thing. So you might notice a drop in my grades. Like they're totally welcome to do that. They could do that for any number of things or include that in the essay in their narrative. But I always have to say, students are like, oh yeah, my GPA dropped to a 3.8. And we don't we don't need to hear why your GPA changed to a 3.8. But if there was like a significant drop off and it was clear, there was some sort of change like that, then you could include that.
Thank you. Mary, are you able to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, for sure. My question is, what if a student has only been here for college and still qualifies for the others first generation refugee, but hasn't been here for high school? Is that an eligibility?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, that's why we said, so we did like the or. So if somebody is undocumented, well, let me see how I should say that. Okay, if somebody has refugee or asylum status, then they don't need to have been here for high school and college. If somebody is undocumented and then they would have needed to graduate from high school or have a GED from a US high school and have graduated from college here. So it kind of, the high school thing only applies to the undocumented category, just because we're sort of trying to apply the DACA framework to these students. And just as background, the reason why we're kind of doing that is because we have never typically been open to visa holders. And so we didn't think it would be fair to not be eligible to visa holders, but be eligible to somebody who's come for college. So we think the DACA framework is really helpful in that way. But we know there's no fair here, obviously. And so unfortunately, it isn't perfect.
Just a follow-up question. What if a student has the visa framework, don't have all the rest, and still wants to apply?
If somebody has a visa, then they would need to graduate from high school and college in the US to be eligible. So that last category would be the only category that applies to visa holders. So they would have had to be born abroad and graduated from high school and college in the US.
Thank you. We still have some time for questions as folks have them coming in. Nika, you talked about an outsized impact. And I know that's something that students can really struggle with as they try to see all of their talents and possibilities, but also maybe have that imposter syndrome or are a little more hesitant to celebrate their accomplishments.
Yeah.
How do you recommend advisors draw that out of students in an effective way that would resonate with what you want to see in an application?
I think, I think that imposter syndrome can be really challenging for our applicants because so many students come from backgrounds where humility is really important, but it's also confusing to know what accomplishments kind of count, I guess, as being really important accomplishments. I tend to think in storytelling, being specific can be really helpful. So instead of trying to say everything you've ever done, picking one thing that's really important to you in terms of what like an accomplishment is, like using that as the framework to tell your new American story can be really helpful. So picking an accomplishment and then thinking about how did you get there and why is that so important to you can be a really nice way to allow a student to tell sort of all the complexity of their story and that accomplishment. And it allows them to kind of speak somewhat humbly about it. But students don't need to shy away from, just saying what their accomplishments are. And that is why we have a resume, so that they can just, include their accomplishments. And it is why we have recommendations. So recommendations really are a great way for people to, if you think your student is amazing, make sure those recommendations have that same zeal, because it really does make such a difference when you get that enthusiasm from 3 letters versus just kind of 1 letter and then 2 letters that are a bit tepid. Yeah, so I would just make sure that the student really understands what their accomplishments are. I think many students don't even know what their accomplishments are, especially if they're first gen graduates. They might not realize that is such an exceptional achievement, and so, because they're comparing themselves to people that might have had, if you go to our website, you'll see fellows who have had internships, it seems like, since the day where they were born. And so it's really hard to make those comparisons. So sitting down with somebody and saying like, okay, what are your great achievements, even if they don't fit on your resume? And then how can I, as a recommender, mention those things? How can you talk about them? I sometimes recommend students do a map of their accomplishments. So like, what are the main points that you really want to drive home on your application about you? What are your accomplishments? And then just see like, where are they in the application? Are they on your resume? Are they in the recommendation? Are they in your essays? And not everything has to be everywhere, but like, are there the right amount of each thing so that we really get the takeaway point? If you're telling us you're an amazing medical student, but you also have a poetry interest, but then poetry has kind of taken over your application, it's going to be confusing. So sometimes like kind of mapping that out can be really helpful.
I love that idea.
And certainly, talking to older students or other people who have had fellowships, I mean, that can also be really great. And I will give a plug for our website. We did a series of webinars in the spring for students in specific fields. So we have a law and policy webinar that any of your students can watch. And it's great to hear directly from the students who have this fellowship. That said, I think it was a bit heavy on the law side of things. So just, making sure that they know like policy is totally fine on its own without a law degree or a business degree.
We're happy to work with you to celebrate some APSIA alum who are also fellows.
Yeah.
I'm curious too. I know some of my colleagues on the line, for example, work with McNair scholars and some other fellowship programs that also invest in graduate education. Do you take into account what other support students might have when evaluating candidates for the fellowship?
We really don't. We don't think that students should ever be penalized for getting other scholarships or fellowships. We don't think it's a reason to give them a fellowship either. So it's not a good thing that they have another scholarship or fellowship, although certainly it is a marker that they have pushed and that they're pushing for themselves. And it can be a great accomplishment. But it's not like, oh, great, they have XYZ thing. That means they're going to be a perfect fit. But we do really like to see, we like to see students getting as much support as they can, because we believe that this is the next generation of leaders, and everybody knows how hard it is to get through graduate school these days. So all the support that can go to somebody is never enough.
So to my colleagues on the line, what sorts of questions do you get from students as they look to navigate this space? What kinds of things can we help you take back to your campus? For those who might be wanting more information, you shared your website and social media channels. If they wanted to ask for paper, I know that's very old school of me, but are there ways to get hard copies of materials so that when human contact happens again, we can share this with students?
That is a great question. We right now paper is really challenging for us just because it involves us going to an office and sending it, and we're not totally capable of doing that. But we could certainly work with you, and we would love to know what if you do have an ideal need. We kind of pulled back on paper this year just because we didn't think it was a huge need just based on where people are, but I'd actually love to hear from advisors if it is something that could be helpful. We just had to make the decision so long ago that I wasn't sure where we would be. And it does seem like a lot of people are on campus now. So, maybe it is the right decision. So just, you can let me know, but it is a little difficult for this go around. And yeah, if you can always follow up with me about questions, you can put students directly in touch. I think it's, students also can just start an application this year and not finish it just so that they can try. Or if they're like kind of feeling up for it, but they're eligible next year, I always think it's good to try to apply this year and then like do an even better job next year. But it actually is very helpful for a student to go through the motions and get all those pieces in and get them in on time. I think a lot of people think like, oh, I'm just going to apply this one perfect year. Well, there's no perfect year when you're applying to grad school. You're busy. And once you start graduate school, it's only going to get busier. So, if you can encourage students to apply early, it's great because you can apply more than once. And that's always good. I mean, of course, they have to be eligible for the fellowship, but if they are applying for graduate school this year, why not have them apply and kind of get that process going?
All right, folks, let us know in the chat. Are you paper, and are you team paper or team no paper?
Yeah, totally.
You mentioned the deadline is October 28th. By when do students usually have an answer about their candidacy?
They will know more in early January about whether they made it to the finalist round. And then at that point, we let everyone know you either made it as a finalist or you are no longer being considered. We don't if you're no longer being considered, we don't really provide any information on why or what the ranking was. And then beyond that, we do 77 people to be finalists. We invite them all for an interview. This past year was our first year doing them virtually, and I think they'll be definitely virtual again this year, but then hopefully we'll go back to in-person interviews. And our interviews are group interviews. Each student has 2 group interviews, and they are on the same day. The interviews can really go on any topic that is relevant to their application. So they might, if a student is in policy, they'll likely be asked policy questions or about how they're thinking about policy, particularly if they have like a specialty. And they're not you're not expected to be a genius and know everything, but we want to know, how do you think about policy and what are the questions you're asking? Who are you considering in making those, in answering your question? But questions could also be about their new American story. They could be about a drum circle they started in college. It could be about anything. So sometimes applicants have 2 interviews that are all about things that have nothing to do with their area of focus. And that's probably because they did such a good job talking about it in the application. So the folks want to hear more about the rest of the student that's applying. And sometimes it's kind of, the opposite. Like they want to know, they got a great sense of the personal part, but really want to know more about what you're researching. And then sometimes it's in between. So those are the interviews. And then we let everyone know in mid-March who got it and who didn't. And then we announce the fellows in April. And then the funding begins in the fall. We do provide some retroactive funding. So if somebody is doing a one-year program, or they're doing a two-year program, but they're getting the fellowship for their second year, we would try to, well, sorry, it wouldn't apply for 1 year, but for 2-year masters, if somebody gets it the first year, so it will apply to the second year of their program, we will look at doing some retroactive funding for them for that spring semester, and do our best on that.
So typically students would have accepted into a grad program before they found out whether they have the funding, because usually that's also mid-April.
Yeah, it's if you're applying to graduate school while you're applying to our fellowship, you will often still be hearing from grad schools, because we tell you in mid-March if you got it. The good thing is you can tell your universities that you're a finalist, and then, before then, and then we will work with any student who hasn't heard from a graduate program right away to let the universities know that they received the fellowship. And that's the best time that a student can really negotiate what their tuition is. So we really try to help, if somebody is undecided, then they can really swing a school to, offer a better tuition and that kind of thing. If somebody's already decided on their program, there's not much room for negotiation, but we do our best.
We never encourage students to negotiate. What are you talking? No. Colleagues, we have just a few more minutes, so this is a great time to draw out any more wisdom that you might need. Again, we will have the recording available on our YouTube channel afterwards. Looks like we have one vote for digital resources. I'm just an old person, I guess, who likes paper. But I'm not in the office either to hand it out. So I totally understand why digital makes the most sense.
Yeah, great. And I really appreciate everyone coming. And if any of you have any questions at all, feel free to get in touch. I would love it if you could email your students, as broadly as possible, to let them know about this opportunity. I think as advisors, the hardest thing is knowing who is an immigrant or child of immigrants, because we just don't often know that information. And so getting the word out broadly so that more people than fewer people find out about it is ideal. And we really appreciate your help in getting the word out. I think, students are often frustrated because they get to graduate school and they haven't found out about us. And so we really want our students to find out about the program, or we want potential applicants to find out as early as possible. So thank you.
Thank you. And we'll do our best too to make sure that we spread the word. Any last bit of advice, either for advisors to steer students in this direction, or perhaps caution them to pivot away from applying for the fellowship?
Ooh, we really have built our application to be something that will help every student. We have heard over and over again from applicants who didn't get the fellowship that this is the first time they are writing about their new American story. And it often is an essay that they will treasure for the rest of their lives, that might be an overstatement, but one that they really appreciate, and many will treasure. But it is a great essay for all sorts of work that they will do in the future. But we really just don't ask people often what it means to be a new American. And that's a worthy question for all of us to be thinking about, especially as we, as young new Americans approach graduate school and approach problem solving. We want them to know that new Americans are doing so much for our country, and that there are so many people that are doing big things. And while they may pave their own path, there are people that have had similar challenges and opportunities. And, you know, we really hope that this community can uplift them and inspire them, even if they don't get the fellowship, but hopefully they do. But this is just a great opportunity to apply for something and see what happens. I do kind of encourage advisors to let their students know, you know, apply, but don't count on getting it. It is really competitive. But it's, you know, it's important to apply to things. Justice Sotomayor has a great quote about, you know, just kind of like there is just having a dream is important, and there is value in that. And I that's not the quote, but that is what she was getting at. And I think that's what we always try to tell our fellows is, you know, it's and our applicants, it's just so important to do the thing and to try. And you have a 100% chance of not getting it if you don't apply. And I will say the big, you know, such a big turnoff for so many people is that they see so much Harvard or Stanford or something on our website, and that is totally valid. But we also have so many students who went to other schools or who go to other schools. It's just sometimes you don't necessarily see that, and you count yourself out because you're counting other schools. So and the other thing is that we get so many applicants from those institutions, and they're great institutions. So yeah, they've got a great chance of getting it because they're applying. There's so many people applying from those schools. But we would love to have more applicants from other schools, and we really appreciate your help in making that happen. So thank you. And if you have any questions, we're more than happy to answer them.
Thank you. I think that's very well said. What is it? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Exactly.
Not Justice Sotomayor, but
yeah,
we're the LeBron James School of Conventional Wisdom. But thank you to all of our advisors for being here. Thank you, Nika, for sharing the wonderful fellowship with us. And we look forward to encouraging our students to be a part of this opportunity. So thanks to everyone. And I look forward to seeing you at future APSIA webinars. And we also share that mission to help as many students lower the barriers to thinking about grad school as possible. So let us know what we can do to help as well. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.